Cool. Well, why don't we kick off? Hey, folks. I'm Sile, co-founder and CEO at MetaView. Welcome to another what I know is going to be a blockbuster installment of the AI and recruiting series, brought to you by us here at MetaView. So I want to keep this intro short because I know that really the reason we're here is to hear from our amazing guests. Seriously, cannot think of a better panel for this topic. Sometimes when you're putting together folks for an event, you sort of have a list and you work through a few, and maybe people calendars don't align, you can't make it happen. We had yeses, all straight from the top. So yeah, pretty amazing to have this group together. If this is your first time attending one of the events in this series, I seriously urge you to check out the previous ones. They're available on our website, metaview.ai. And I'd also urge you to check out MetaView as well. So MetaView is an AI note taker built specifically for recruiters. So we use bleeding edge AI to take your interview notes, summarize them, and structure them just the way that you like them. This means you can focus much more on the candidate, being curious, being engaging, maybe even influencing their final decision, and really giving them a great experience, and spend a lot less time cleaning up and writing up your notes into your ATS or CRM afterwards. Been a game changer for hundreds of recruiters all across the planet. So definitely check it out. Head over to metaview.ai. You can kick off a free trial. Takes just a few minutes, no credit card required, so no excuse for not giving it a go. Without further ado, that's all from me. Really pumped to be putting this event on. So yeah, over to you, Hung. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sile, and welcome everybody to the show. This is, I think, episode 6. So we've already done 5 of these already, and the focus of it has really been, okay, we've all heard the talk about AI, we've all had a play with it, but where are we exactly with its implementation, its operationalization into our day-to-day? So that's going to be the focus of the show today. The reason why we selected this awesome panel, because they're all like leaders in their own field. They've all led departments, leading businesses, and it'd be interesting to have a view from their side in 2 levels. Number one, how are leaders personally using AI in this regard? And then number 2, how is it cascading through the rest of the department in the talent acquisition function, or in analytics, as is the case for Mike, and how is it actually operationalizing throughout the rest of the business? It would be interesting to know sort of where, if you like, the recruitment function sits in its relative adoption of these technologies compared to other departments that we typically recruit for. So that is the topic of today. Just want to make sure before we kick off, though, that everyone can hear and see everyone okay. So this is Zoom, so I'm sure everyone's used to using Zoom already. Let me know in the chat whether you can hear or see me okay. You should be able to say yes to everybody. Thank you, Trevor. That's exactly what I want to see. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, everybody else. Wow, there's lots of people here. It's great. Okay, we're going to try and use some of the features here. So if you want to say something, do use the sort of raise a hand. I'll try and grab, figure out where you're at in that. Make sure you keep talking to us on the chat. We'll try and respond to that as we go and see it. And of course, if there's any specific questions that you definitely want the panel to answer, use the Q&A feature, because we're going to go to that towards the end of the webinar, and then make sure that those questions are answered. So use the chat for chat, but if there's specific things that you definitely need nailed, and your job is on the line if you don't get it answered, make sure you use the Q&A function at the base of the screen. Okay, cool. Let's do some intros. We're going to kick off with all of us here. So one at a time. I want to go for you first, Mike. Mike, can you quickly intro yourself, who are you, what it is you do?
Sure. I'm Mike Wolford. I'm the Director of Analytics at Claro, and I live in Talent Intelligence.
Fantastic stuff. Let's go around the clock as I see it. Glenn, Kathy, I'm sure everyone in the world knows you, but why don't you quickly introduce yourself? Who are you, what it is you do?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Glenn Cathy. I work for Randstad, and I actually have 2 roles. One is in a talent advisory function, and the other is in digital strategy.
Fantastic stuff. And Marcus, introduce yourself. Who are you? What it is you do?
Yes, sure. Marcus Köhnlein. I'm head of different startups. I'm building my own startups, and that's my main role. So I do a lot of HR and different stuff.
Fantastic stuff. And Jane, wonderful to see you. Can you quickly introduce yourself? Who are you? What it is you do?
Sure. Jane Curran. I lead a global talent acquisition team. about 300. We hire about 30,000 people a year. And I sit in Chicago.
Fantastic stuff. Okay, has AI peaked, everybody? Let's have this as an open question. I kind of get sort of I'm monitoring this all the time, and basically you saw ChatGPT hit 100 million users in like 5 days. Suddenly there was a hockey shaped curve. It was like exponentially going this way. And then around 2 months or so ago, it started to kind of plateau a little bit. And I think it's still trending down somewhat. Is this just the summer? Are people just away and forgetting about work altogether? Or have people given it a real chew and then thought, okay, that's really cool, but I'm not sure how to actually make it work for me? Where do we sit with this? I'm going to throw this one open. Does anybody have sort of some intuition on this? Yeah, what's your initial thoughts on where we're at with generative AI as on a broader sense, ChatGPT in a specific sense?
Yeah, I can.
Go ahead, Jay.
Go
I
ahead.
think you say so.
I was just going to say, I think we have to drive the purpose to the tool. I think that there's, at least in talent acquisition, endless use cases. But I think, at least if I talk about it just from my team perspective, I've got to give them reasons and time to develop and, test out new job description, test out interview questions, help them utilize and see the benefits of the tool. But alone, I don't think they're going to take the time to discover. So my view is, I don't think we've peaked at all. I just think we have to give more examples of why, and then coach, teach, enable, and support.
I would
go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I would concur. Like, this is just getting started. This is warm up. Some people have tried it and it doesn't come with instructions, and they didn't take time to figure it out, so they got bored and left. But that doesn't mean the tool itself isn't extremely capable. And to Jane's point, like, there are endless use cases for this, and the next versions are going to be even more capable. So this is prelude. This isn't, crescendo.
Yeah. So I believe we are in a kind of cycle, and that was the first phase, and we go forward. I'm sure it will run forward, and I think it's really like, I think Mike, you said it, it's really like some people tested it, some people got bored, but it will change a lot of new features come in. So I believe there will be a huge hype, a huge progress in the future.
You're gonna have to say something, Glenn. Things that you everyone's had a go. What are your thoughts on it, man?
Yeah, I hate, I don't like to interrupt people or step on toes. Very good comments so far. I agree. It's still very early. I think another angle that I can bring to this discussion, though, is that, there's going to be some limit to what you can do with free tools. And I know some companies are obviously feeling these out from a privacy and security, and responsible use perspective. So I think you're running into a scenario where some companies would say these tools could be very interesting if we could leverage it with our own data and not just having our people going out and using it publicly. And that adds a whole nother dimension in terms of complexity and time for companies to navigate that, to figure out, well, maybe we use an off-the-shelf solution, maybe we build our own. And you just have to figure out how we're going to be able to get to that stage where people can use it at scale with their own company's data and not just playing around with it on the public sites, which is still very interesting, and you can do crazy good things with it. But I think that's going to be slowly the next phase that we jump into. But there's some security and privacy concerns that we have to work through.
And Hung, if I could just comment on that, because I don't know if anyone reads our press releases, but we did launch JLL GPT about a month ago for that exact reason, that we want a safe environment for our employees. So right now we have 103,000 employees that have full access in a safe environment. And then we'll, materialize and have good things to help with our clients. But right now it's a safe environment that we did create.
That's really interesting. I was about to actually, thank you for your interjection there, Jane. Super relevant, because I was about to mention the McKinsey example, where they, I think, recently rolled out their own version to say, hey, this is trained on our proprietary data. We're going to use it internally. Obviously, they may have some way to externalize that, but maybe that's one of the reasons why we haven't fully operationalized the GBTs yet, because there is a sense that, hang on, if I'm interacting with this, well, where am I sending my interactions? Where's it going? Are we increasing the exposure to the business in some way? There's ambiguity either way on that, and that can often be a kind of a tar pit for progress when people aren't sure exactly, can you use this data? Is it safe? And wonderful to see companies like JAL rolling this out. It's probably worth another conversation another time, Jane. Like, how painful was that to do? Was that easy to do? Did you manage to get the tech guys to go ahead and do it? And was it a big project? Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think we'd probably have to get our chief data officer, Yao Morin, on a call. And Hung, I'm happy to like connect you to. She's amazing. But I think we wanted to be a market leader, right? We all of a sudden it's there, but we're like, you can't use it because we are in a client environment. We can't be going on ChatGPT and then being like starting to release information that we don't potentially trust. So for us, it was like, we believe in the tech. We need to do it. We want to be a market leader. The length and time and development it took, we probably need to jump on a call with Yao to figure out, but it was, in development and realizing we wanted to lead.
It seems that it's probably faster than most people would imagine a significant technology to be. I'm old. I think everyone here is probably old enough to remember the 3-5 year type software implementation type of period, where it just took forever to basically put an access database into a system. It was like crazy. But these days, it seems that we can get like significantly increased capability in the technology with a lot of speed. Like it seems that we can get to the implementation point and productivity point a lot faster, which is one of the big promises that we have for this technology. And by the way, I'm reminded even of a very early example of people using public facing GPTs and getting into trouble, and it was actually from the legal sector. If you remember, a few legal firms, I think they ended up producing sort of legal contracts and so on. It was from the public training data set, and ultimately it turned out it was either contradictory or in some way illegal how they put it together. And of course, you can imagine legal firms are stepping away from it straight away and thinking, right, we've got to do what JL have done. We've got to train it on our own data so that we make sure that whatever comes out is actually being cleaned, if you like, gone through this legal audit that we go through. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Can you share it to everyone, Jane? I think you just shared it to the panelists. We have to, I'll tell you what, Zoom is so annoying with that. Can everyone default to everyone when we share? We want no elitism here. Okay, great. So there's a few things here. There's a legal ambiguity. And Jane, leaning on one of the observations you made, and also with Mike as well, one of the things that's kind of stopping the operationalization of it is leaders perhaps not providing the space for people to experiment and learn, because it just takes some time, right? It's not something that it's a immediately out of the box turnkey solution. You've got to interact with it. You've got to get familiar with it. You've got to do the reps. And as you're doing the reps, of course, recruiters, as ever, are getting kind of crushed with do more with less mantra. When are we going to find the time to do it? So somehow we as leaders have got to carve out the time and say, okay, we're going to run you at 95%, but that 5% I'm going to give you, I need you to get to this level on AI, because that's going to lead you to be able to do 120% in 2 months' time. So how do you even do that? Is that even feasible? I mean, we kind of say it, but we want people to deliver fairly yesterday, don't we? So how do we have that conversation with ourselves, and how do we cascade it into the rest of the team? Any thoughts on that, Mike? Let's go with you first.
Sure. I think yes, for us, we're actually training on use cases internally. So rather than just giving people the keys and hoping they do the best, we have an AI policy now about usage and the difference between ChatGPT and GPT-4 and use cases there. And now we have formalized training. So like, we don't say, yeah, you can write an email with it. It's more like, here's how you write an email with it. Here are your options, and here's what to pay attention to. Don't just copy, paste, and blindly send to a candidate. right? You got to read it first because you're accountable for the AI wrote it is not an excuse, right? That's part of the policy. And also disclosure, right? When we're using these tools to create content, we have to disclose it as well. So just giving, rather than letting people experiment, and I think maybe that there was an appropriate time for that, it's now time to formalize and say, here's our policy. Here's what you can and can't do from our perspective. And here are the use cases that we want to train you on. Here's our templates for how to write an outreach email. Here's our template for writing a job description with AI. Like, you're going to see standardization, whereas right now everybody's trying to figure it out. Now that there's some standardized use cases, look for you would standardize your policies and standardize your training so that everybody is rowing in the same direction, basically the same as you'd roll out any new tech.
Very interesting. Folks, just a quick one to the audience. Have you guys got to the point where you're rolling out policy on the usage of AI? Let me know in the chat what the situation is there. In fact, Stephanie, I wonder whether you could throw a poll on that, because it'd be interested to get a gauge as just generally where we're at. Obviously, 6 months or so ago, no one had any policy. We were just like individual experimentation. But have we got to the point where actually someone's decided, maybe your legal department, maybe CEO, maybe it's even the TA person that said, you know what, this is the general guideline as to how we're going to do things. Let me know in the chat where you're at with this, because I think that can be both an accelerant and a suppressant to the usage in some respects, right? Because there's going to be people that are waiting for the structure to charge ahead. And then you're going to have some of the, if you like, maybe the early adopter maverick types will find it as a constraint, and they'll be outraged that there's some sort of constraint on what they're doing, and they might just be super disaffected. So I think there's going to be it will have two effects: suppressant and acceleration. Glenn, let's go to you. At Randstad, I believe your job, by the way, there's the poll, folks. Why don't you go ahead and drop a yes or no on the poll? Has your company rolled out AI policy? Let's see whether we can get some results there. Going to you, Glenn. You're, as I understand it, in charge of the, let's say, improving the efficiency of recruiters in Randstad, right? Your job is basically to up-level all of these folks. That tells me that for you particularly, maybe you've got a particular interest in getting people to use AI in a certain way. Is that the case? And if so, where do you see the maximum areas of benefit for recruiters using this class of technologies?
Well, that's a big question. I appreciate it. I do have to make a comment, though, that we did come out with some guidance, and I think that's important. It's kind of like what Mike said in terms of do's and don'ts and examples. And I think it's worth mentioning that is a cross-functional team. So early on, we had, of course, legal was involved, data protection was involved, IT was involved, marketing was involved, business leaders were involved. And we created essentially like a responsible use guidelines. Here's what not to do, here's basically what's a green light, what's a cautionary, and then like you can do this, and then there's also things you can't do. And then within that framework, there are many examples, some of them that Mike even touched upon. There's research, getting people to start using generative AI to help them with research. I think it's even like a Google Labs now has their search generative experience. It's something that I could almost say that I don't live without now, because if there's something I'm not that familiar with, I'm going to use generative AI to help me understand it. Boolean search, job descriptions, social posts, candidate outreach that was mentioned, candidate pitches, intake managers, intake meetings with hiring managers, interview prep. Technically, there's almost no area that you can't use these tools. Let's be honest. It can be used as a co-pilot as well. I think an assistant is one way to think of it, but it's almost like a second set of AI eyes in this case, where you're like, well, this is what I would normally put together, but let me see what ChatGPT or Anthropic's Claude or Bing, which uses GPT, but the output's different, I've found. Like, what does it think about this particular thing? And it doesn't even have to be something that's externally facing. I know we're talking about talent acquisition, but I found it to be impressively good at coming up with things around strategy and process. Impressively good. So I like to push people's to experiment because we're probably going to come up with things through crowdsourcing ideas, through everyone feeling comfortable understanding what within the boundaries of what's safe, to come up with even new use cases that we haven't thought of yet, where there would be a benefit. But I think it's also important to try to have some mechanisms in place to be able to measure the benefit. In some cases, it's just kind of assumed, yeah, it's saving me time. In some cases, we've seen like a 20% time reduction. In other cases, I don't know if you would say using a calculator, saves me time, and we need to figure out what the actual number is there, because it's just an assistant. But we are setting up some programs and some pilots to be able to come up with some hard numbers around like, okay, what's the real impact of this in terms of time and quality?
That would be super interesting. I mean, obviously, it may end up being a proprietary thing for Randstad, but I think that would be very interesting for just the general community to know, because we can imagine, the polls come back, by the way. It looks like 86% has said no to that. So the 14%, congrats, you're way ahead of everyone else with policy. But the 86, don't be too disappointed. I think it is early. It is still a case. A part of it is like who even owns the idea that there should be a policy. I mean, it's not clear where this sits, because AI obviously is a foundational class of technologies across every department and every function. It isn't IT's job. So as soon as we establish who owns this, then we'll be able to figure this out. But I do think it could be a trigger for more people to gain adoption. Going back to the point that Glenn mentioned, though, like one of the things that all recruiters and recruitment managers, TA leaders need to care about is things like KPIs and things like this. How are we efficient? How are we operating? Are we above the bench? Are we below? Are we improving? Suddenly this so-called transformative technology comes in. Does it reset what is a good KPI? Like, does the numbers change? If I say things like, we think it's going to improve productivity, does that mean suddenly a recruiter who we used to think, okay, they could do 4 hires a month, actually they should do 6 hires a month? I mean, do we think that's going to happen? And if so, like, how does that happen? Is it a good thing if it happens? Thoughts on this? Jane, I'm going to go with you first, because I think with your huge team, I mean, probably this is more prominent in your mind than most. Because if you have 300 people, I'm not saying you don't have personal relationships with everyone who's reporting to you, but at some point, they become a little bit more numbers based. It's like everyone's on a spreadsheet, right? So how are you thinking around the KPI aspect of this?
I think over time, I think it is way too... we're like infants learning to crawl, right? Like, I don't think that these transformational numbers of you fill 4, now you can fill 6 is going to happen quickly, but I want high touch and high tech. I want them to focus on the experience. So when, our poor recruiters have so many racks and hiring managers and candidates to get through, I'm kind of with Glenn that this becomes their assistant. So you need to use it to your benefit. We're creating a 6-part series for our recruiters in video to watch and give them those use case examples. It's all about, speed, quality, diversity, and experience, right? So to me, this should be helping with speed. What are the things that are lower value, highly repeatable work that you can say, I should be using AI to do that? So that's really what I'm trying to identify. I think over time, it will help with productivity, but we're so new at this that it's going to take a couple of years to probably feel that impact. And you're going to have your early adopters. You already have people on the team that are like, I can't get enough of this. I found 6 more use cases between job descriptions, interview scheduling, feedback loops, things like that. But we got to bring everybody along with the journey. Most people don't like change, right? I mean, it's just a fact of life. So you're adding one more piece of technology, one more idea to a recruiter who's like, I got enough. You just introduced something else to me last month. Now this is new. So you just have to respect change fatigue and figure out, how am I going to help folks see the value? And then it becomes like automatic. Like, of course I'd use GPT for this. Why would I do this like I used to do it? This is the better, faster way to do it.
A quick one, Mike, before you say anything, I just want to underline one of the sort of observation Jay made, which I thought was like a really potentially a profound way to look at it. So in other words, I kind of provocatively said, look, this is just a machine to kind of improve kind of productivity. But actually, maybe one of the measures you need to put in are all of those other softer measures, if you like, What is the candidate experience? Is that improving as the efficiency of recruiters improve? Because guess what? The reason why candidates have poor experience is because you've got recruiters that are overwhelmed. I do not believe recruiters are lazy. I do not believe recruiters are just bad people. They're just crushed under workload. That's why they can't get back to you in time. But if you have the co-pilot or some sort of assistant supporting you, our leaders actually saying, okay, great, rather than crush this person with more hires, why don't we try and improve the candidate experience by getting them to do more human-to-human activity? So think about more than just the bums on seats type of metric, but actually employer branding, candidate experience, hiring manager experience, recruiter experience, all of those things. This is the time to kind of shape those into a future KPI set. Because if we neglect it, then someone else is going to say, you know what, why is this not moving faster? Why aren't you doing more hires? Why aren't you doing all this? And then suddenly we're kind of chasing the truck down the road there. Okay, either Marcus or Mike said something before I rudely interrupted. So whoever that was, please continue.
I was just I wanted to bring something to everyone's attention that Glenn kind of mentioned just in passing. He asked, what does it think? Like, that's a fantastic question. What does it think? We're dealing with a tool that has a form of intelligence. We haven't crossed the consciousness line, but there's intelligence here. We're using an intelligence to solve problems. And I just wanted to call that out. That's something to pay attention to. We now have thinking machines. So ask it. Another thing might be, here's what I'm doing. Can you help me come up with a solution? Ask GPT what it thinks.
I think that's actually a brave thing to say. I know a lot of people would criticize the point of it, whether it's intelligent or not. And I actually agree with you, Mike. I don't think intelligence is necessarily consciousness. Intelligence is simply the ability to learn stuff. Like, there's lots of things out there on the planet that have clearly some form of intelligence that are not conscious of themselves. But you could even say some human beings might behave a lot of the time in this way. So yes, I think definitely it is intelligent, and the way to get value out of it is to actually have a relationship with it, and to build that kind of it's a rapport. It's like
tell her what you do. Say, I'm a recruiter. I need to get better and use this tool. What are some of the ways I can use you and you can help me to be faster as a recruiter? Just ask it. He'll say, oh. And then you could say, here's a couple of my emails, act as a critic and help me write better outreach.
Can I introduce just an example from the world of tech? I had a conversation with a CTO in Berlin, actually, and there's a concept in software engineering called paired programming, where basically two programmers would basically tackle the same problem simultaneously in an effort to, you got two eyes, two brains, you're going to just make sure you're covering all of the problems. And even if they're both tunnel vision, at least you got two tunnels. So you've got a better chance of actually making sure you pick up all the problems. And he said, actually, he measures his employees on their ability to collaborate with each other as paired programmers, but he's now going to implement how do they collaborate with the AI? Because he's saying, you know what, it's not whether they're better programmers or not, it's that what are their collaboration skills with the technology? Because this thing is going to respond back to you in the way that dumb technology previously didn't. So if you think about most of the tooling we had before generative AI, it was pretty dumb. Even though some of it was spectacular, it just wouldn't respond to you. It's just a dumb tool. But now this thing is actually interacting with you and getting better or worse based on your interaction. Marcus, good time to bring you in because you're building some of this stuff. What are your thoughts on our relationship with tech? I mean, we're kind of, this seems like a big step change in terms of our relationship with tooling, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big change what happens at the moment. And of course, I'm now not from the recruiter side, but we do something a little bit similar with one startup. So we connect students and companies worldwide, which is some kind of recruiting. So we offer in the end standard services like social media management, accounting, whatever, with students, with talented students worldwide. And so what we do is we match automatically the profiles because we are a startup. So we have people, not enough people to do this matching. So from that side, it needs to run in the background of our systems. And that's why if you come to us with a request, with an idea, then we can find worldwide the best student who is matching. And that's in the end an algorithm. That's in the end a kind of AI. And that's our belief also how the world is changing.
Very interesting, Marcus. Let's segue a little bit into personal usage. So everyone here is a leader. By the way, as you go up in your career, you get busier, right? Your capacity goes down. You get overwhelmed by stuff. That is how it is. So anybody who's like looking forward at climbing that ladder, that's the future ahead of you. Where are leaders using AI? I mean, have you used it in a personal way that you found particularly beneficial? And if so, can you give us that like most optimal use case for you personally? Mike, you're sort of nodding your head there, so I'll go with you first, but I think this is one everyone can answer.
Sure. For me, it was writing. I wrote the AI Recruiter. I'm almost done with a novel. I'll be done with a novel this week. I'm going to try and write a novel in every genre with the AI. So, normally it takes me about a year to write a book. It's a couple of weeks at this point, probably about 4 or 5 weeks into writing, and I'm about a week or two from being done with writing a novel. So that's what I've been using it for.
Okay, let's step back here. How are you making sure it's still speaking with Mike's voice, man? Because if you're gonna just instruct it and it's gonna, produce a novel, who's gonna read GPT, produce a novel?
Yeah, it uses your voice. I mean, it learns your voice anyway. So yeah, it will learn what your voice is and your way of saying things. It picks up on that. It's really great at pattern recognition. Like that's its superpower. It can take, the pictures it creates right now. Like it looks at noise and then just judges pixel by pixel based on the text what the picture should be. That is a heck of a pattern recognition. And so it's really good at recognizing. It can pick up on your pattern and your mannerisms of speaking really quickly.
Yeah, and by the way, we should talk about video in a second because I think that's obviously next frontier with some of these GPTs, and it's going to be very interesting. Okay, before we go on though, I'm fascinated about the novel. What is the novel, Mike, and when can we buy it? Might as well give it a shot. I mean,
so the AI Recruiter is already available on Amazon. It's printed. And the next one is going to be a romance novel. It's about a week and a half, 2 weeks away from being print.
Great.
So I just got to talk to the publisher.
That's it. Get it out there. Let's. To be honest with you, democratization of novel writing, I think, is a very positive development on all of this. Okay, let's go to you, Glenn. Where has AI really helped you in your own work?
I'd say number one is brainstorming for content development. I can only give a high level example, but let's say I have a vision for something, some capability, and then I could say, well, what would the requirements be? What are the data infrastructure requirements to be able to enable this type of functionality? And that's very close to something I've done recently. And I was absolutely blown away by the quality and the depth of the response, to the point where maybe I had to tweak 10% because 90% was so spot on. And sometimes, though, I get surprised by that. And in other cases, I step back and realize that I actually shouldn't be surprised when you start to understand how these things have been trained and on what large corpus of information it's been trained. And then the way they put together, the way it just produces text. It's a prediction engine. And so when you think about, well, if this has been trained on a good portion of the internet and presumably on content similar to what I'm asking it to do, and people have shared publicly their information on that, it synthesizes it, puts it all together. But that's a very real world scenario where it could have taken me, I don't know, 8 hours to think something through before. In this case, I can say, wow, I actually produced really good output in, let's say, an hour as an example. And that was just me saying, I have an idea for a product within the company and I want to be able to achieve it. But if I'm going to start interacting with IT people and start breaking it down, what are going to be the requirements to make this happen? And I'm going in armed with that information. Again, I probably could have thought through it all myself, but now, why would you? It's amazing.
So this basically, for me to summarize that, this is about like acquisition of knowledge, acquisition of the entry into the domain, in the sense that if you are going to go into Randstad to the tech team with a product idea, they're going to want more than just a high level, hey, why don't you do this, guys? They're going to want actually, okay, what does it look like? What does the architecture look like? What kind of bits need to go into this? And of course, this is where the GPT can help you fill in those gaps. And again, this is knowledge that you could have acquired by rigorous searching on the internet, but the thing could generate you some viable, so it kind of advances you forward in terms of your expertise. And in fact, this is actually one of the areas in which we've seen some evidence that AI supports people that have a low base. And I'm not, please understand, this is no offense to you at this point, Glenn, because you know my respect for you is extraordinarily high. But where you have kind of a low base of domain knowledge, it's actually really good for like getting you to a level faster compared to someone who's got already high expertise. So in other words, the benefit is greater for someone who knows less than it is for someone who is a super expert, because the super expert is going to say, yeah, I knew this already. Whereas actually someone who didn't know it, actually that just shortens your time from 6 months to 2 months to productivity, or in Glenn, your case, 10 hours to 2 hours to get stuff done. So have a think about areas where you're weak, you know, and don't spend hours trying to learn it. Maybe you could accelerate this. Okay, go ahead.
Just one quick add-on. It ties into something that I didn't even realize I said it that Mike called out. But I mean, anything that even you think you know well, why not double check? It could be DEI strategy. It could be workforce planning. I'm confident that anyone listening to this that says, okay, I'm going to give that a shot, and you put in a good prompt, you will be surprised at the quality and the thoroughness of the output. And most of it, you might say, oh, I kind of know all that. But what's really nice is when you're like, oh, that's an interesting angle I didn't think of. It took you, what, 2 minutes to do that? 20 seconds? Why wouldn't you do that?
And as an addendum on an addendum, you can actually ask GPT to do exactly this. Look for bits that I have not included. Look for something that, please challenge this list that I've created. What should not belong there? What should belong there? And it will make an effort to do so. At the end of the day, this is intellectual effort that you could have made, that you could have done, but it just takes the weight off. So it takes that cognitive load away and actually produces at the end more comprehensive output. Jane, what are your thoughts, personal usage on AI?
I would say the most elementary use, but we try to keep as much recruitment in-house. We try not to use agencies, both at the executive and any level. So very often we have senior leaders saying, okay, this is a job I want to go after. It's nothing we've done before. And our recruiters, executive recruitment team would spend, maybe a couple hours designing a job description. Now it's like, take a little bit of here, take a little bit of that. Now you just say, help me draft a job description for X senior executive job title. And it's like in 2 seconds, right? Now you're just editing something versus creating it from scratch. I think the second thing I've seen, like immediate use case and adoption, is when a recruiter has to go for the first time a job they've never worked on before, and they don't want to look like, I don't know what this job is, I don't know what they're talking about. Now, kind of what Glenn just said, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to learn really quickly about this profile, what they do, and I'm going to go into that intake meeting a lot more confident, because before I just had a job description, but I didn't have any meaning. So I'm finding those two things to be the easiest and most adoptable. Personally, I feel that I'm using it to write quick notes, letters. I think the most interesting thing will be for those of you that lead large teams and you have to write annual reviews every year. Maybe this will help craft a little bit of those messages you're trying to send quickly. If you've got 10 plus direct reports and you want to write up. So I haven't done that yet, but I could see it as a use case, to help you write formal reviews.
Can I just say a friend of mine is using GBTs exactly for this, and I was like, okay, that's very interesting. But large team, loads of reports, but crunching all of the information that's coming through, all of that written documentation, and then just asking the GPT to just make sure, okay, what are the key things that have been pulled that we need to definitely isolate in this conversation, and then helping that sort of just accelerate through that process. It's almost like, you know what, either you crunch through this data yourself, manually reading word for word, which you don't, by the way, you're going to skip through, right? Everyone scans through stuff like this, and therefore you potentially make a mistake, or you get the AI to do for you. And whilst it might still make mistakes, it's less likely to do so than you are, or it will make different kinds of mistakes than you would. Between you and the machine, you should cover more bases that way. Okay, Marcus, your thoughts on this, like personal usage? You're an entrepreneur, you're kind of building tech. Have you actually used the tech to help you do any of this?
Yeah, of course. We also use it for programming. It helps a lot. It helps a lot for understanding things. And so in the startup world, the challenge is always you have to do so many different things. So you do technology, but you also have to sell your product. You have to do marketing. You have to do HR. You're in so diverse areas, and there it helps a lot just to understand the things, just to understand, yeah, what should you do? How do you run a campaign? All this information is in there. And if I think back when you use it in the classical world with a search engine, it's much more work. It takes quite a while till you find the right information. And if you just ask, hey, give me a list of the 10 key points, then you have it.
Yeah, and there's a reason why Google have launched the generative search experience, right? Because they're aware that actually traditional search, index search, if you like, has produced really, I think over time it's really produced poor results. This is why sourcing exists, right? It exists precisely because the system doesn't deliver what you want. Therefore, it requires you to develop this extraordinary skill set to interrogate the system. But here you got natural language, it will generate it for you. Some of the comments have got some really interesting use cases here. I just want to explore this, and what are our thoughts on this? Okay, who is it that said this? Was it Rhythm Jolly? Yes, it was Rhythm Jolly. He's saying, look, what he or she's been doing is actually using GPTs to sort of select CVs. So in other words, you've got 100 applicants, 1,000 applicants, too many applicants. You put it all in the zip file, and you pipe it all into GPT-4 or something, and say, you know what, crunch through all of this and isolate and compare it against this job description as I've described, and please select for me the top 20 that I need to contact. And in fact, you could probably then plug it into something else to do the outreach for you as well. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, I think this is actually quite advanced. Wouldn't you agree, folks? I mean, do you think this is advanced or not? I think it's probably towards the 10% that probably are not doing something like this yet. So yeah, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, do you think this is a legitimate way is it an okay way to do it? Does it breach anything policy-wise? Where do you think of this particular use case of it? Thoughts on this, anybody?
I think it's a possible use case for sure.
Yeah.
I don't think the tech maybe isn't ready. We need to make sure it's all in compliance, but the ability to do that certainly will come quickly. I think we all just want to make sure we're doing it. Somebody just said, make sure it complies with laws and doesn't have any bias, things like that, but it certainly will happen.
And you can tell it that too. Like the one thing I think to get better prompts out of it too, or better results, especially in our profession, is to specifically ask it to draw on a field of expertise. So when it's drafting a job description, ask it, also review this as a lawyer and make sure it's legally compliant. I'm not saying that that's perfect, but I am saying that GPT-4 has passed the bar exam in the 90th percentile. At your fingertips is going to be hard to get better legal advice than that quicker. So you can ask it, act as an HR expert and act as draw on its expertise to make sure that, to double check the work. Part of our AI policy came from GPT-4, us asking, we're a company, we do these sorts of things. What are some things when we use AI that we need to think about? Ooh, here you go. Here's some of the things you need to think about. So
And by the way, folks, this is maybe another good reason why having a policy is actually very valuable, because you can then pipe it into GPT maybe as a default, or Jane, if you, produce your own sort of GPT, it would already be built in there, I assume, to say, look, any outputs that we produce need to be compliant with these general guidelines. And that should hopefully kind of reduce the risk, and you can go ahead and go for it. Okay, there's another use case here that I thought was really interesting, kind of an advance on that. These two things might be used together. And this is actually having a GPT agent to autonomously reach out and screen candidates with WhatsApp or SMS messages through natural conversation, and then stick it back to the CRM. I think this is a type of product, I've seen demos of this, so it's obviously out in the wild. What are our thoughts on this? Taking it beyond resume review, we're actually contacting candidates now. Presumably, this could be a completely seamless experience without a human recruiter being involved at this point. Is this where we should be? Maybe recruiters end up handling candidates more like candidate managers rather than candidate sources or outreachers. What are our thoughts on this use case? Again, everyone.
I'm for it. I just think it's a matter of time, right? That I want recruiters doing the human valued work, which is the candidate experience, making sure, I mean, changing jobs is an emotional experience. Do I want to change? Do I like this company? And a recruiter has to be that, champion, cheerleader, salesperson of the organization, but they can't today. They don't spend time doing that. It's like they're processing people. So I guess my view is I want that source screen schedule, top of the funnel stuff to become more automated. But as the funnel narrows, I want the recruiter to just like, this is where you live and this is where you make an impact.
That's a really cool visualization, Jane. Thank you so much for putting that sort of concept in. So the funnel is there, and actually the funnel describes the distribution of work often, doesn't it? Because right at the fat area at the top of the funnel, that's where a lot of recruiters are constantly spending time. But okay, if these tools are going to help us do that, then actually we need to move down or up the funnel, whichever way you orientate it, and dealing with the parts where actually we need to build relationships with candidates in order for us to effectively do right by them and do right by the organization also.
Well, and one more thing, Jim. Like the sourcing team now that like maybe has to source a rec, like, oh my gosh, we don't have candidates for that rec. We're going to, like, instead of that sourcer just doing that, we want to build talent communities, right? So that they may still stay at the top of the funnel, but they're nurturing leads of like, we're on the same page. You want to work here, we want you to work here. And right now the sourcing function can move to the next level, which is really managing talent communities versus like just trying to find Boolean search strings in LinkedIn to find candidates. Like, I just think we're going to move past that. There's still a need to source, but it's going to be more around communities.
Very interesting. And I'm not sure I entirely agree, but I do agree that we need to move down the pipe. Glenn, I just saw you had your hand raised there. So beg your pardon for not seeing that earlier, but please do sort of come in.
Yep, no worries. I try to be polite. It's one thing I wanted to comment around one of the previous scenarios that was brought up is that you just have to be concerned about using AI to explain itself when, if you understand how large language models are designed, they are designed to create good, readable, plausible output. So if you're asking it to provide you with a reason why somebody is a good match, I think there is a danger of just automatically accepting whatever it says. But if you, and after I'm done talking, I'll actually pop a really good article in the chat that really help everybody understand why these solutions are so good at not necessarily making things up, but producing content that may not actually be accurate. So we just have to be critically aware of those types of scenarios. I think pre-screening does totally make sense. I think people have to be thoughtful and responsible with regard to automated decision-making. Figure out what is the logic. Are we actually allowing artificial intelligence to make a decision on who passes the screen or not? Or is there a more thoughtful way that you can put in some rules that are 100% explainable and actually it's just an execution of a human decision? You know, if it's a binary scenario where you either have this particular qualification or you don't, maybe that's an area that's safe. But I think some types of screening questions, and depending on how the solution is designed, you could actually be running into a scenario where it's the AI is making the choice, and that's actually illegal in certain parts of the world, and is challenged in other areas as well. So it's something you have to really walk a fine line of understanding what you should and can use AI for, and what you shouldn't.
That's a really good point. And in fact, Jennifer, I think you mentioned this in the chat there, that there's obviously laws that are coming in, which are policing the usage of AI, and in fact, maybe increasing the exposure you have as a business if you do indeed use AI. So again, this is in sort of the state of New York, I believe. And this is now actually in the statute book. So basically, they're saying something to the effect, and again, I paraphrase. You can look this the law yourself. But the essence of it is, if you say you're using AI, the candidate or the job seeker is entitled to certain protections, such as you need to declare that you're using this, and you need to be subject to audit, for instance. Like, how do we know you're going to pass this audit? Guess what? You don't. No one's ever done this before. So there's all kinds of exposures that you might have if indeed you're saying we need to use AI in this way. One of the conversations that I think so the ethical conversation, which I think overlaps with the legal side, is that you kind of use AI in the safest areas that you can, which is about knowledge for yourself, self-improvement, L&D. You move it away from the areas where it's basically making decisions on human beings. So when it's making recommendations, where it's making yes, no's, where it's scoring people, those types of things, even though it seems that, yes, technically it could and should do this, but this is where you're going to run into a compliance issue, if not already an ethical issue. So these may be only temporary ways in which you could operate before someone comes down hard on you. Okay, folks, we're coming to really rapidly. I told you this conversation go by quick. Please do ask questions to the panel. If you have used the Q&A function to do that, we're going to come to those in a bit. But why don't we, whilst people populate those with questions, why don't we talk a little bit about recommendations that everyone has here for TA people, TA leaders that are kind of thinking, okay, what do I need to do to make sure that I'm moving forward as a person, we're moving forward as a team, doing so in a compliant way. I think we all agree you can't ignore it, because if you do, you're going to get overtaken and outcompeted. At the same time, we need to, operate with due care and due diligence for our own ethical and legal protection. So what's your advice? One bit of advice that someone can use on this. Let's go with you first, Mike.
Sure. Trust but verify, right? Like, the AI did it is going to be the new you're on mute, right? Like, it's not going to be an acceptable answer though. So to Glenn's point, it does have an answer for you, whether that's the right answer or not. I was just watching Yuval Noah Harari talk about this very issue, and he was like, most of our language is instructions. It's not true or false. DNA is a set of instructions on how to build a thing. It's not true or false as we think of it. And most of our communication isn't measured on, is it true or not, right? It's typically instructions on how to do something or build something. That's what language is used for. And so with that caveat in mind, understand that this is a language model designed to give instructions on how to do things. It's not a truth machine.
Yeah, really, kind of concise way of describing it. Don't look at it for the definitive answer. That's not how it works. You got to interact with it. You got to talk to it and treat it basically like any other flawed interlocutor out there. That's how you got to deal with it. Okay, Glenn, your thoughts on this?
Wow, good word, Hong. I'm a word nerd, so I appreciated that. I would say I actually want to piggyback on something that Jane had mentioned earlier. Identify opportunities in your process or experience where you have challenges or you have opportunities for improvement. I think you can also start looking at repetitive tasks and saying, are there things that we do that are time-consuming, repetitive, and rule-based? Because those are things that you could start saying these are potential candidates for the use of automation. But of course, steering clear of making sure we're doing the right thing and not the wrong thing when it comes to automated decision making. But I also think it's a good time for people to think about, where do I as a person add value? You know, where am I adding little incremental value from me doing it as a person, to where do I as a person really add value within talent acquisition? Jane touched upon that as well. Some really good points there just around. I also want to provide some advice to say, well, where do we go from here? I think Mike also talked about, in the future, these solutions are going to get even much more capable. And I think it's a good question to say, well, where do people play in the process? And what are the skills that I should be continuing to work on to make sure that I continue to add value in the future, that I am not replaced? And even though I would definitely say the right way to look at these is an augmentative approach, there are going to be companies that are going to look at some technologies and say, you know, we can actually get the same results with less people. And that's true of any role. It could be software engineering, it could be accounting, it could be recruiting. And my advice is, if you want to be someone in the future that's still in your particular role and continue the path, you need to embrace these tools. You need to understand how they work, how to use them effectively and safely, and then just to figure out what your role is too, to make sure you kind of exercise those muscles that are the human element of the recruiting process.
Yeah, really good point. This is not a train that is stopping. It's just going to keep rolling forward. And we're kind of all hanging on with our fingernails here. No one's truly kind of on top of it. But at the same time, what you have to do is make sure that you're kind of checking yourself, so you're not getting left way behind. Because the further you are behind, the harder it is to catch up. And yes, it will transform a lot of the activities we do, and it will shuffle what is valuable or not that humans can do, right? So when that priority changes, we've got to kind of understand, okay, where am I spending my time? Because you need to be spending it in the time that is super valuable. That's the way to kind of future-proof what you're doing. Marcus, what's your advice to a recruiter right now listening to this webinar?
Yeah, so a big point is experiment with it, try it, play with it, understand it. And it's so immense what happens, so you can't just ignore it. That's a very important point. And another point more from the technical side, structure your data. And that's what a lot of people forget. They just do AI, think they make the big AI, and then they forget about their data, that their data is totally unstructured, no governance process, no data management process. So how will you work with your data when the data is not available for the AI, especially for internal cases?
Yeah, very, very good. Okay, Jane, go to you. Final word. What are your thoughts on just advice? You know, you're a friend of yours that's moving forward in his or her career as a TA person. How would you advise that person on how to use AI?
Well, every company's talking about AI. So to your point, it doesn't have a true owner. In our organization is JLL. It is our technology division. But in your company, find out who's taking the lead, and then figure out how to get in that committee, that thought leadership, because the number 1 and 2 use cases are marketing and HR. So like to your point, this is coming, and I like to be, I don't like have things done to me. I like to be part of the decision-making process. So my view is, if you are a recruiter and in TA, figure out where's the epicenter of AI being discussed and how can I be part of that solution. I have an opinion, and I have so many use cases. Like I'm saying to my team, I want a beta, I want a pilot, I want to be part of this because I know it's coming at me, and I want to be part of the solution. The other thing is hung. I mean, it's like follow you, listen to recruiting brain food. Like we have to be educated on this topic in recruitment. So find your sources, find your podcasts, find your articles, and stay relevant.
If you search a generative search, what does Hung Lee come up with, Glenn? We're gonna have to figure that out. It's probably some comedian from Australia or something. I don't think it's me. So AI needs to be trained and updated. But thank you very much, Jane, for your compliment. I do appreciate it. But the first point I think was even more important, which was figure out the locus of AI, even the locus of decision making within your own business. Given the fact that obviously recruiting or TA is a function, usually in a big company. It's probably not in us, but where is the decision being made? And make sure you're adjacent to it, or at least, you know, rubbing in there, because without it, as you say, Jane, we're going to just have it rolled down to us rather than be a participant or a contributor to whatever decisions are being made. That's really great advice for anybody thinking about career progression anyway, but also about if you're leading a department, it may even be a responsibility you have as a leader to understand that you have to do that to help and defend your department as well. Okay, cool. I've got one file. We're going to go straight to the question. We've got one more before we have to kick ourselves off. This is from Tim Q. Jones. Tim, great to see you in the chat. Tim is saying, okay, for when there's a time, I'd like to understand if there's the differences that are specifically where the candidates can use. Okay, yeah. Okay, so this is the candidate usage of it. So let's forget about how we're using it. Do we have a policy on candidate usage of generative AI? If so, what is that? Quick round robin on this. Mike, do you have a policy on this?
We don't yet, not on candidate use.
Okay, cool. How about you, Jane?
No, but as far as I know, I'm supportive of candidates using it to create, say, a resume. I just think this is where we are in the evolution of technology. I mean, when the calculator came out, right, they're like, no calculator, you can't use. I mean, you know, it just is, this is the new version of that. Like, we have to be supportive of the use of a candidate using it. But I'm sure there's pros and cons.
Yep, and also we don't know how to detect it, right? I mean, all of the detection stuff that's coming out, I mean, can you even trust that? That's a lawsuit down the road. I mean, if you accuse someone of saying, hey, you produced this with ChatGBT, and they say, no, I haven't, can you prove it? Then you know what? I think that's litigation. Okay, Glenn, thoughts on this?
The answer, no. But it's definitely an interesting area, especially when people could, depending on the way that assessments, right, or initial screens, there are some that definitely could be used. People could be using these tools to pass assessments. So I think that companies need to be looking at their talent acquisition processes and be aware of the fact that people may be able to use these tools in certain parts of the process. I agree with Jane. If you're going to use it to create a resume, that's fine, cover letters, etc. But there's going to be some areas where you want genuine human input, maybe not augmented, and people need to be aware of that.
Yep, absolutely. There is a risk of candidate fraud. Let's face it. We've seen really interesting examples of this. So how do we do our due diligence? In fact, I believe doing the verification aspect of it is going to be an increasingly important part of the recruiter's job. Because guess what? If we're passing through candidates that actually are fraudulent in some way, then that's a bad mistake. And by the way, where is the line between using a tool and being fraudulent? I don't know. Maybe it's disclosure. Maybe it's something of that degree. I don't know right now. It's completely gray. Okay, Marcus, final word to you. What are your thoughts on candidates using generative AI on, you know, trying to pass through an assessment process?
Yeah, so from the first part, we have no policy. Of course, we are too small for that. But I see it's used everywhere. So it's I think at the moment it's normal, just everywhere uses it. And I think the future will show what's happening there and if we can detect it. And it will be also quite difficult, I think, to detect it in the future.
Yeah, I think so. We've just got to roll with the punches on this one, folks. But I do believe it means work for recruiters to do. I think in-person interviews, stuff like that, will start becoming even more prominent, even though we thought during the remote era that would be relegated away. I think they're going to come back. Okay, that's about it. We're well over time. Thank you so much to our wonderful guests. You've been amazing. Marcus Kernlein, Mike Wolford, Jane Curran, Glenn, Kathy, thank you so much for joining us. Folks, thank you for watching this episode. Make sure you continue to keep an eye on what MetaView are doing. We're going to keep rolling forward with this series. I think we've got another 2 more to go before we conclude. So do make sure you follow their company page on LinkedIn, and Stephanie will update you when the next episode is out. Okay, that's about it for us. Thank you so much, folks. We'll see you next time.